of progress. Labor for a nation. Growing economies. Building countries. 1st of May is Workers' Day.
There was a time that they workers were rotten egg. They were tarred and feathered. They were exploited. And all of the things that can go with maltreatment, like we still experience in Namibia. So the advice that he gave to his people was, stand strong, be strong, because as a group, as unity, we always have a stronger force above the people on the other side of the line than you have individually. And thanks to God that he would never lay something on your shoulders that you cannot carry.
For centuries, humans have been fighting for their right to freedom, dignity and survival, but most of all, the right to be treated equally, irrespective of ethnicity, social standing or economic status. Unfortunately, fighting for these rights also means that there is a risk of lives getting lost. And as sure as the sun rises from the east, a tormented soul shall never rest until it is liberated. In 1886, U.S. workers were subjected to long hours, harsh working conditions, and low wages. One day, they decided enough is enough and eventually downed their tools. Have you ever asked yourself how the 8 working hours that we enjoy today came about? Ambassador Thomas Daughton takes us back to 1886 and tells us how May Day originates.
On May 1st, a group of labor organizers, unionists, even some anarchists and reformers, social reformers of various kinds, called for a march. And there was a march that involved 35,000 workers. It was a Saturday, but people were still working that day because they had to work that day. So people took off from work and they marched through Chicago. It was part of about a week-long series of marches that because of that Saturday being the day they were really focusing on, May 1st became the date that was associated with the movement.
In Namibia, it is difficult to separate the workers' struggle from the struggle for liberation.
I think people tend to forget what May Day, what International Workers' Day is all about. They forget, I mean, it's been almost 150 years. They forget that it started as a struggle against terrible working conditions and that it benefited millions and millions of people. And I think for young people, because they don't understand that the work conditions used to be so bad, they don't link that and the changes that were brought about with May 1st. It just becomes another holiday. But it's a good time, I think, to stop and reflect on why it's a holiday in the first place. And it's a holiday in the first place because unions helped improve the lives of their workers.
Petrus Ilonga, a former Robben Island prisoner and Secretary General of the Namibia Public Workers Union, NAPU, from 1988 to the year 2000, played a significant role in mobilizing workers under the banner of the National Union of Namibian Workers.
Yeah, in Namibia, the workers started also long ago, before came to put up down tools. There is a first, as we know, the workers were fighting the contract labors, which started by our people like the Tatekuru, the former president, the father of the nation, and many others. They were starting first fighting to add contract labor system, of which people were taken from their families, and they go and work and for 2 years, 3 years, and then they came to 18 months and so on.
Dr. Kudumo, a former teacher in Rundu in the 80s, was a trade unionist in the National Teachers Union, NANTU, formed in 1989.
Back then, obviously in Namibia, there was a law that did not allow blacks to belong to trade unions. They were therefore needed to protect, defend, and promote the interests of the workers and the working class. Especially in the colonial setup, we realized that we are not going to get those rights unless the trade unions participate in the national liberation struggle. So trade unions are needed now because their mandate and functions of defending, protecting, and advancing the interests of the workers and the working class are still relevant. That's why they are actually needed more than before the independence. I think it's important in the case of Namibia to recall that the contract labor system led to the liberation struggle, the fight for national liberation, as well as the establishment of trade unions. You were collected type of from where you are. You see, it was more in Kavango and the former of Ambulant. You were collected where you are and registered and put in a truck and taken to Grootfontein to be examined and to be posted wherever you are supposed to be going. When you are in Grootfontein, you are given a number that's put in your neck or around your neck. The poster with a number on, and maybe the name of the employer where you are going to. So you forget about who you are.
Tim Parkhouse, the director of the Namibia Employers Federation, NEF, shares his view on the contract labor system.
The contract labor system was inhumane. There's no doubt about it. The workers were recruited by Swanler in the north. They didn't know where they were going. They didn't know who they were going to work for. And if they came and worked for XYZ company and didn't like it, they couldn't leave. They were not allowed to. And one of the worst issues at that time was the family. Often the wives did not know where their husband was. There were no cell phones in those days. There was no laptops and computers where they could Skype and that sort of thing.
Herbert Jauch was the first director of the Labor Research and Resource Institute, and he has this opinion on the matter.
There were attempts over the decades under colonial rule, several attempts to set up unions, but they were every time met with severe repressions. And that time also there was a close collaboration between the workers here and some unions in South Africa that came across the border to assist each other. So in the fishing industry, in the mining industry, there were the early attempts to establish unions, and they were crushed every time. And then in the 1980s, the labor laws were amended a little to allow black workers to form trade unions for the first time. And at the same time, there were some of the political reforms, which included the release of some of the political prisoners from Robben Island. So people like John Pandeni, Benu Lenga, Peter Ilonga were amongst them, Jerry Ekancho, and many others. And mid-80s in Namibia, a kind of community organizing emerged. And workers took some of their problems at the workplace of discrimination, of poor pay, of exploitation, to social workers at the Council of Churches in Namibia, the CCN, to people like Rosa Namises, Bob Vedera Kandetu, and others.
David Namalenga was a shop steward of Nafau in the 1980s.
Workers in the country are the pillars of the economy. The people that have been subjected to discrimination more in terms of earning and the hard labor were the blacks. And of course, it could only be translated to say is discrimination of any sort, so an apartheid. So the payment system was not right. The benefits were not right because they were benefits that exclusively made for a specific class of the working people. It was embodied into the law that was governing the relationship of the people in the country, and a law that has been put to the black people at the backyard and being the tools of productions, but not as beneficiaries. So in the early 90s, the late 80s, it was hard to find a black man paid a better salary, and also a black man participating in the pension scheme or medical scheme.
The first TCL strike happened in 1987. The protest was against low salaries, ongoing inhumane hostile conditions, and increasing tension at the corporation. This tension continued to build up until the workers went on another strike in 1996, which crippled TCL in its day-to-day operations. Isai Nekundi worked for TCL in the 80s and clearly recalls the mood at the time.
We found a system where employees were in two categories. Those who are called skilled category employees, those are now mostly the whites, and very, very few, maybe a number of youngsters who came to take up apprenticeship here. And then the unskilled category is now the bulk of the labor force. Being treated this way, the issues then at that time, you could see with your naked eyes pure exploitation in terms of hardship. The employees have to endure the treatment then from the bosses, the way the supervisors were talking to these people, you know, and we happened also to talk to them, hear what they are being paid. Starvation wages. Sometimes they have to work long hours. You don't have the right to say, no, I can't work overtime. It was mandatory. And, you know, this was the type of treatment which one could term. It was inhumane and, you know, discriminatory in nature. you won't believe at this operation you could find even ablution block toilets that were reserved for whites only. It was actually written where you will find a restroom written for European only. That was the exact word on the doors. Or a lunch room, which is written for European only. The environment in which we were operating, because I happened to become a union leader since 1987, it was a combination of factors. You know, you have the situation on the ground that is forcing you, really calling it enough is enough. We have to stand up for our rights. We have to fight for our rights. And on the other hand, the political climate in the country, you know, was actually also raising the awareness of self-determination, and it was a combination of this force that actually gave momentum to workers in general and to the leaders in particular. The passion was there. You know, there was just nothing, there was no alternative thought other than just to say, no, we have to fight the system in the country, whether you are at work or you are off work. So if you knock off, you are actually subjected to harassment out there, and the same situation, you enjoy the same situation. So it was, one could say, a motivating factor that have actually motivated the working class that time to say, no, this can't go on like this. And union in that sense, where we actually happen to operate, you know, under genuine agenda.
Just like the mistreated children of Israel at the hands of the Egyptians, whom God delivered from their enemies and led to the Promised Land, the Promised Land known as Namibia brought about an act by the Ministry of Labor and Social Services, the Labor Act of 1992.
Well, the 1992, I must admit, it's